11 now, the text tells us that God asked them about the problem that they had, and that is, he asked them about their sin. And I want you to notice beginning at verse 7, or verse 9 rather, that God called out and said, "Where are you?" And then at verse 11, God asked them, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?" God knew the answer to that, but he's asking for emphasis and for them to give an account for what they've done. So notice in verses 12 and 13, that's the focal point for our beginning of our study. They claimed to be victims and they played the blame game. Now notice at verse 12. At verse 12 of chapter 13, we may just have to forget that. Hopefully we're going to work tonight. Look at verse 12 and 13 of Genesis chapter 3. Then the man said, "The woman whom you gave me to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." Verse 13, and the Lord said to the woman, "What is it that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." They played the blame game, and they began to point their finger at someone else. She says, or he says, "It's that woman that you gave me." He shifts the blame. Notice at verse 12, "The woman that you gave me, she gave me of the tree and I ate." She then points to the serpent and said, "It's that serpent. He deceived me and I ate." The point is they claimed to be victims and they were not responsible. I'm not responsible for what I've done. I'm a victim of what's taken place. So I want us to look at this concept of the blame game. By that, it's a very popular game that is alive and is played today well as it was in the Garden of Eden. That is, it's played in the world. It's played in the business circles. You see in the business circles constantly that people are shifting the blame to someone else. The reason you have problems with our product is not me. It's someone else that caused the problem. Someone else caused the problem in the world. It's played in politics. We've seen that over this last cycle of this year. It's played in the school. And it's played in the church, and it's a concept where I have a victim card that I'm able to play and say, you know what, I'm a victim and I am not responsible for what I did. I am a victim of what has been done. I am not responsible for my actions. And so we play the victim card, and I am a victim of what has taken place. So let's talk a little while tonight about the blame game. And that is the victim mentality. What's involved in this blame game? Well, I want us to go back to Genesis chapter 3, and the first point I want us to consider is the idea of the first players of the game. Let's talk about the first players, and Adam and Eve back in Genesis chapter 3. But the first players, I want to talk about what they did. They claimed to be victims of the faults of others. They claimed that what was done was not our fault, but it was someone else. Notice in the case of verses 12 and 13 of our text, that concerning Adam and Eve, that they would not admit, "I have sinned," nor would they admit, "We have sinned." Wouldn't admit that at all. Listen to the quotation from White, it's quoted by Pulpit. Concerning Adam, that this was a cold expression manifesting neither grief nor shame at so foul an act, but rather desire to cover his sin. What Adam is saying is, I'm not responsible for what took place. I'm not responsible at all with reference to what took place. It is the woman's fault. Concerning Eve, she didn't even mention the sin of tempting her husband. But she said, "The serpent beguiled me." That is, by beguiled, he caused me to forget. What the serpent said to me caused me to forget your instructions to me, and therefore I committed the sin. So she's saying, I am not responsible. Again, I'll quote from Pulpit, quoting Hughes, who said, "A forced confession this is, but not apparent contrition." She is saying, I did eat, that's true, but it's not my fault. It's true I did sin. It's true that I ate of the fruit, but it's not my fault. It's that serpent's fault. I am not responsible for the thing that took place. And so in each of the case, they are shifting the blame to someone else. Now notice back at verse 12 of Genesis chapter 3, that Adam blamed the woman and blamed God. That is, notice at verse 12 he said, that the woman that you gave to me, she gave of me and I did eat. He's saying, it's her fault, not mine. And after all, God, you're the one that gave her to me. So really, it's just as much your fault as it is mine. Notice at verse 13. The woman blamed the serpent. They're saying neither of us are responsible. Anybody is to blame but ourselves. But let's go back to the account in Genesis chapter 2. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, and notice that in Genesis chapter 2, let's notice what God had said concerning the requirement. But of the tree of knowledge, I'm reading in verse 17, of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Regardless of what others have done, regardless of what Eve had done, regardless of what the serpent had done, here's some things we can list. Number one, they both knew the rules. They both knew the rules. Genesis chapter 2, 16 and 17. They knew that they were not to eat of that tree. So regardless of what the serpent had said, regardless of what Eve had done, they both knew the rules. Regardless of others, they both knew the consequence. They both knew that if they ate of the tree, they would die. Regardless of others, they both had a choice. Look at chapter 3 and in verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and she ate. And she gave to her husband, and he ate. So regardless of others, they both had a choice. And regardless of others, they were both wrong. They both did something wrong, and they did something contrary to the will of God. Now, let's catch up a little bit and get back to our text in Genesis chapter, let's go to Exodus chapter 32. In Exodus chapter 32, I want us to talk not only about the first players, but I want to talk about a lot of players all through history. That throughout history there have been a number of players. And by that I want to talk about Exodus chapter 32, some other cases of people. We'll get caught up here in a minute. Exodus chapter 32. Let's talk about how Aaron blamed the people and he blamed Moses. That this was the first players in the case of Adam and Eve, but I want to talk about the case of Aaron and how that Aaron had blamed the people and he blamed Moses for what took place. Exodus chapter 32. You remember while that Moses was on the mount, that Aaron and the people that were around the mountain, that they had taken their gold and they had cast it in a fire and they shaped a golden image, a golden calf, and began to worship the calf. Let's begin at verse 1. That when they saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together gathered to Aaron and said to him, come, let us make gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And Aaron said to him, break off the golden earrings. Notice this is his idea. That are in your ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. And so all the people broke off the golden earrings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fastened it with an engraving tool and made a molten calf, and said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so Aaron saw it, and he built an altar before it, and made a proclamation, tomorrow you shall fast to the Lord, is a feast to the Lord. And they arose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and rose up to play. What's the point? The point is they made this golden calf, and Aaron was just as much involved as anyone else. Now drop down to verse 19. When God saw what was taking place, he instructed Moses to go down and talk to Aaron about the problem. And soon as he came here, you're reading with me at verse 19, he came near the camp. He saw the calf and the dancing, and so Moses' anger became hot. And he cast the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf which they had made and burned it with fire and ground it in powder and scattered it on the water. Well, notice now at verse 21. He made the people to drink of that. Now verse 21. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do that you brought such great a sin upon them? Notice what Aaron said. He said, do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. You know what these people are like? They're set on evil. Look at verse 23. For they said to me, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of them. So I said to them, whoever has gold, let him break it off. And they gave it to me, and I cast it in the fire, and the calf came out. You see, I'm not to blame. I'm innocent here. What's going on? He's saying, you know these people, they're set on evil. They do this kind of stuff. And they're the kind of people that set toward the kind of thing that you see here. And besides this, they wondered where you were. You're not innocent in this, Moses. Had you not lasted so long off up on the mountain, we wouldn't have done this. It's not my fault, it's the people's fault, and it's your fault just as much. And so he's one of the players of this game. The first players were Adam and Eve, but now we have Aaron blaming Moses and the people. Let's turn to 1 Kings 18. Ahab, wicked King Ahab. Let's turn to 1 Kings 18. You remember as we're turning there in 1 Kings 18 that Ahab was one of those characters that the wicked king who had led the people into their idolatry and led them in their sin, and he caused all the problems that Israel is facing. At least he's a ringleader in that. And I want you to notice at verse 17 that when Ahab saw Elijah was a man who was preaching against his sin. He was the man who was pointing out the sin of Ahab and Jezebel. And what did he say concerning Elijah? He said, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Here's a man stirring all the sin. Here's a man trying to deter the sin. And the man who stirs the sin blames the man who's trying to deter it. Are you the troubler of Israel? You're the one causing all the problems in Israel. Suppose you have someone begin to stir up trouble in the church here and just sowing great discord in the elders to talk to him about quitting his sin, and he blames the elders for stirring discord. That's exactly what's going on. It's a blame game, shifting the blame to someone else. Let's take another case. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 15. I'm trying to illustrate to you the players through history have played this blame game of shifting the blame on someone else. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 15. You remember in 1 Samuel chapter 15, as you're turning there, that God had given the instructions to Saul to go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Destroy the king Agag and all that is there, man, woman, and child, and all their possessions. Go do that. Go do that. So I want you to notice, beginning about verse 6, that Saul departed, and now dropping down to verse 7, that he also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, I'm reading at verse 9, and the best of the sheep and oxen and fattening of the lambs, and all that was good. Spared all of that. That's not what God told him to do. Samuel comes on the scene and begins to question him about that, and ask him, he said, what have you done? And Saul said, "Blessed are you of the Lord," and reading at verse 13, "I have performed the commandments of the Lord." Notice his claim. That'll be important a little bit later. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing the will of the Lord. I've done the commandments of the Lord, he said. And Samuel asked them, "What's the bleating of the sheep that I hear in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen that I hear?" Notice Saul's response. He said, "They, not me, not we, not us, they have brought them from the Amalekite. For the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord, but the rest we've utterly destroyed." He's shifting the blame. Someone else is to blame for that, not me. Don't look at me now. Look at the people. You know the kind of people they are, just like Aaron did. Well, let's talk about the elder son now. Talk about the elder son in Luke chapter 15. Do you remember when the younger brother came back home? We'll talk about him on Wednesday night. The wayward son comes back home. Stayed away for a while and wasted his substance with riotous living, but he came back. He's the prodigal son who came back home. And when he came back, the older brother was out in the field, and he drew near, and he heard the music and the dancing, and wanted to know what was going on. And when he was told, "It's your brother who's come back, and now they're celebrating," remember what he said to his father? Look at verse 28. "He was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. And he answered him, he said to his father, Lo, these many years I have served you, and I never transgressed your commandment in any time, and you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours has come, who has devoured his livelihood with harlots, you kill for him the fatted calf. Son, why won't you come in? Why won't you celebrate him? Why won't you welcome your brother?" I want to tell you why. It's your fault, Father, because of the way you've treated me, what you've not done for me, and how you've treated him. Shifts the blame for his problem. Let's talk about the case of Peter. It's not so much shifting the blame, but it's the same concept. Let's turn to John chapter 21, if you will. In John chapter 21, here's the case of Peter seems to be worried about somebody else rather than focusing the attention to himself. He's worried about everybody else. You remember the Lord gave some instruction to Peter, and what he said concerning his fate, beginning at verse 18, he'd live to be an old age, verse 18. He'd be in prison, verse 18, and he would die in the service of the Lord, verse 19. But in the meantime, what he needed to be doing is following me, Jesus said. And notice Peter's attention in verse 21. He turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, who I think to be John, and following, and the one who had leaned upon the breast at the supper, and upon the Lord's breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is he that betrays you? And Peter, sitting, seeing him, said to Jesus, But Lord, what about this man? Here's what's going to happen to you, Peter, and you need to be following me in the meantime. You're going to die in the service of the Lord, and you're going to live to be an old man, and you're going to suffer, but I want to tell you what you need to be doing, follow me. But what about this, man? What do you want him to do? He's shifting the attention to someone else, and the Lord said, if I will that remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Don't worry about everybody else. You just do what I'm told you to do. And what I'm trying to picture for you is here's a picture of in history, a lot of players through history have played this game of shifting the blame to someone else. They are the victim. I want to talk about some players today now. Let's talk about players today. What is going on with some of the players today? How is it played today? Well, first of all, I want to suggest to you that the players today is, we have people who blame, well, still not working, are we? Blame their parents and their raising. They blame their parents and their raising. How so? Well, let's consider. They blame their parents because their parents have raised them in a certain way. Their parents have made them, their parents are to blame, either because they were not religious, maybe their parents didn't have any religion at all, or maybe there's too much religion with their parents. They shoved it down my throat. And so consequently, my parents are to blame because there was no religion. They made me what I am. I've had people tell me, you see, my parents, they didn't have much religion about them, and so they just kind of destroyed my concept of religion, and that's why I am what I am. I can't help it. Or maybe my parents pushed it down my throat. Or we blame the world and society. How do we blame society? Well, the world, you see, is out to get me. Everybody's working against me. I'm a victim because the whole world is out to destroy me. The world is to blame for that. I'm helpless in a terrible sea, and I can't seem to get ahead. I had a young lady not long ago that was not living as she should and not faithful as she should be. And every time we talked to her, she cried, I'm the victim. What do you mean you're the victim? The whole world, the whole society, and the church and everybody else is out to get me. I'm in a terrible sea of a society. I can't seem to get ahead. There's some who blame the church and they blame the brethren. And they say things like, I'm discouraged. I want to pay attention to that word just for a moment. They'll say, you know what, I'm discouraged. I know there is a legitimate discouragement. I get discouraged, and so do you. But when you hear somebody talking about, I'm discouraged, especially when they've quit serving the Lord, or especially when they're not living as they should, and you go talk to them, well, I want to tell you I'm discouraged. That's a code word. That's a code word to say, I'm going to shift the blame to somebody else. You pay attention to that. Why aren't you attending better? Well, I'm discouraged. What are they saying? They're saying, it's not my fault. I've quit coming to church. I'm not living as I should. I know I'm doing some things immoral, but I'm discouraged. What do you mean you're discouraged? Well, you see, I've been ignored, just like those in Acts 6. Remember the widows that were neglected? I feel like I've been ignored, or I've not been included. Or you see, I've been treated unfriendly and unfairly somehow. I've been treated that way. And consequently, you see, because I've been treated unfairly, that there are people who are hypocrites in the church. And because of the way people are living, I see people that are not living as they should. And so you see, I have become discouraged. And I want to suggest to you that the charges may be true. The charges may be true. Let's go back to the case of Adam and Eve. The charges may be true of what's been said. The world may be out to get you. Maybe your parents didn't treat you right. Maybe people have ignored you. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. I want to suggest that Adam was right. Wasn't he? Eve did tempt him, didn't she? And God gave her to him, didn't he? And Eve was right. The serpent did beguile her. But that did not exempt them from their responsibility. Let's talk about the rules of this game, this blame game. I don't know if you play it around here in Indiana. I suspect these elders would tell me there are people here that play the blame game. Perhaps people even in the church who play the blame game. But I want to tell you how we play it in Tennessee. These are the rules of the game. Rule number one. How's this game played? Rule number one of the game is you refuse to take responsibility for your own action. I'm not saying this is the way it should be. This is how it's played. The blame game is played this way. Number one, you refuse to take responsibility for your own action. What does that mean? Whatever you do, particularly something that's wrong, anytime you're going in the wrong direction, doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, always make it somebody else's fault. Refuse to take responsibility for your own action. Don't come talking to me about my sin. I'm not to blame. It's that woman. It's that serpent. It's the people. You know how they are. Rule number 2. Focus on yourself and how you've been wronged. Don't ever focus on how you've done wrong. Focus on yourself and how you've been wronged. So when somebody like the elders come, or the preacher comes, or some fellow Christian comes and talks to you about not attending as you should, don't focus on your attendance. That's what you've done wrong. Don't focus on that. When somebody says you've said something wrong, don't focus on that. Focus on how you've been wrong. This is how you play the blame game. This is how you whip out that victim card. I'm a victim here. Don't forget, I'm a victim. I'm playing my victim card. Rule number 3. Rule number 3, make the wrong done to you greater than anything you've done. That's how we played that at home. Make the wrong done to you greater than anything you've ever done that's wrong. I may have quit going to church, but y'all ignored me. I may not be there at services, but somebody hurt my feelings. And that's the focal point. Make anything done to you greater than anything you've ever done wrong. You're not the one who's done wrong. Everybody else has done you wrong. That's how you play the game. Next rule. Feel powerless to overcome and act like you're stuck. I can't help it. The world is out to get me. I'm stuck. My parents did this to me. They drove me to this condition, and I'm stuck. I can't get out of this. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just kind of stuck in this sea of terrible society, and I'm in a rut, and I can't get out. It's everybody else's fault. I can't do anything about it. Next rule is, listen to this one carefully. Use the power of the game. Always act as if you're morally right and not responsible or accountable and forever entitled to sympathy. I want to read that again. I want you to get to that point. Because those who know how to play the game, they know this rule well, and they know how to use this rule. Use the power of the game. The power of the game is to make yourself look like you are innocent and you're on the moral high road. And I may have quit serving the Lord, and I may not be doing what's right, but I want to tell you, I'm morally right. I'm standing on the right side. I'm not responsible or accountable, and I'm entitled to sympathy because I've been done wrong. I may have quit. That's true. Somebody hurt my feelings, and I want to tell you, they said some evil things to me, and I'm not going to tell you who it is or what it is because it's awful. And people have slighted me. They've overlooked me, and I have been ignored. That's far worse than anything I've done. I'm trying to ride the high road. I'm trying to be on the upper side. That's the power of the game. And the last rule. Blow your problem up bigger than what it really is. If you've been slighted just a little bit, make it act like you've been slighted more than anybody else. The proverb writer says in Proverbs 18, verses 13 to 17, particularly verse 17 is the verse I want to pay attention to. He that is first to defend his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. You know what that means? When somebody tells their side of the story about how they've been done wrong, the proverb writer says, don't buy it until you get the whole story. There's another side to the story. There's more to it than what you're hearing. Doesn't mean somebody's lying. It just means there's more to the story. There's a different perspective. So when you're telling your side of the story, always blow your problem up bigger than what it really is. Now, playing these rules, you'll have to be a little bit dishonest because that's the nature of the blame game. And so you say, well, my problem isn't that big. Well, if you're going to play the game, you need to play by these rules and blow it up much bigger than what it really is and act like you've really been done wrong. Do you play by those rules? Do you have people around here playing by those rules who are constantly shifting the blame to someone else? It's not my fault, it's the elder's fault. It's not my fault, it's my wife's fault. It's my husband's fault, it's my children's fault. It's the brethren's fault. I'm not responsible. Well, let's move to the last thing I want us to talk about, and how do you break out of this children's game? This is a childish game. It's a lack of maturity when we're playing the blame game. How do you break out of the children's game of the blame game? Here's rule number 1. Here's how I break out of it. Number 1, remember that wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. Wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. Let's turn to 1 John 3 and then verse 4. Sin is a violation of the law. Or maybe I should approach it this way. A violation of the law is sin. Anytime you've violated the law of God, it's sin. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is a transgression of the law. So if I violate the law, it's sin. Take the case of Adam and Eve. The law said don't eat. They ate, and therefore it's a sin. So when you've done something in violation of the law of God, it's still a sin. Wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. Sin still separates from God. James 1 and verse 15. When lust hath conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, it brings forth death. Wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. The woman tempted me. It's still wrong no matter how you got there. The serpent beguiled me. It's still wrong. The people asked me to build the calf. It's still wrong. The people wanted to spare Agag. It's still wrong. Wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. They discouraged me, and I didn't want to go back. It's still wrong. Wrong is wrong no matter how you got there. Second, another rule I want us to consider to break out of the children's game is take responsibility for your own sins. Take responsibility. Ezekiel 18 says, we do not bear the sins of another. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, nor the father bear the iniquity of the son. Look at Ezekiel 18 verse 4, verse 20. So one does not bear the sin of others. I can't bear your sin. I may discourage you, but I can't bear your sin. You cannot bear mine. Furthermore, let's consider the fact that not only does Ezekiel 18 say that, but Romans 14 and verse 12 says we must give an account of ourselves unto God. I give an account for myself. You give an account for yourself. We cannot account for someone else. Notice in James chapter 1, verses 13 to 15, James says you're drawn away of your own lust and enticed. The reason I commit sin is I'm drawn away not by you, I'm drawn away by my own lust, my own desires. So take responsibility for your own sin. Rule number 3, how am I going to break out of the sin? Realize that you can overcome your past. Ezekiel 18 demonstrates that a wicked man can have a righteous son, and a righteous son can have a wicked son. What I learned from that? I learned a son can overcome a wicked father. Maybe you were raised by a wicked parent. Maybe your parents drove their evil towards you. Maybe they even drove religion down your throat. But you can overcome the pressures of the past. You can overcome the wicked father. Paul overcame his past, didn't he? When he raised in the Jewish religion. Didn't he count it all but loss for Christ? Whatever your past may be, you can overcome. The Corinthians overcame their past. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul talks about that the fornicators, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind. He mentions adultery, fornication, and homosexuality. And such were some of you. They'd given up their idolatry. They'd given up their adultery and their fornication and their homosexuality. Even Abraham, for example. You know Abraham was raised in idolatry. His father was an idolater. And he overcame his past and had the great strong faith of Romans chapter 4. Who against all hope believed in exactly what God said. You say, well, I tell you what, I can't help the doubt I have because I was raised by parents who didn't have religion. Neither was Abraham, I want to tell you. Neither was Abraham. You can overcome your past. Next rule. Consider the fact that whatever God expects of me, I can be or I can do. Turn to Philippians 4 and verse 13 with me, if you will. In Philippians 4 and verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I hear that verse quoted quite often in the context of kind of a positive mental attitude that I can do anything that I set my mind to. I want to be a great ball player. I can be a great ball player. Or I want to be a great salesman and I can sell $1 million worth of real estate this month because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's not what he's talking about. Philippians 4 and verse 13 in its context is saying I can obey any command, I can overcome any trial. I can do anything that God expects of me. I can do anything God wants me to do, anything God demands of me. And if God expects you to do something, you can do that, no matter what discouragement you may have. No matter what pressure is on. No matter how much discouragement you're facing. No matter how much somebody may slight you. How much you may be overlooked. You can do anything God expects of you. That helps you break out of that. And one more rule. And that is, you need to stop and consider you're not the only one that has been slighted. You realize other people have been slighted too. And you're not the only one that's ever been ignored or left out. There are other people who've been ignored and left out. You're not the only one to ever get your feelings hurt. And did you ever stop to think about the fact that you may very well cause some of that yourself? Maybe you overlooked somebody. Maybe you had ignored someone. Maybe someone spoke to you and you didn't return because you didn't hear. Maybe someone's thinking you slighted them. You very well could have caused some of that yourself. You're not the only one that's ever been slighted. And you look at those basic principles of rules, you remember wrong is wrong, no matter how you got there. Take responsibility for your own sin. Realize you can overcome your past. You can do anything God expects you to do. And realize you're not the only one that's ever been done wrong. And that'll help you break out of this childish game of the blame game. What have we seen in our study tonight? So the first players, Adam and Eve. The first case of sin, they started pointing fingers. It's not me, it's her. And by the way, you gave her to me. Oh, no, it's not me. It's that serpent, part of your creation. He beguiled me, caused me to forget. They were the first players. And they played it well. And it's been played all through history, all through the Old and New Testament. It's being played well today. And we see the principle of how that game, the rules of the game, how we play it. It's being played well among the people of God, at least some of the people of God. And then we see how we ought to break out of that, how we can break free from the childish game of blaming everybody else. Are there things in your life that you need to correct? And rather than pointing your finger at everybody else, it's their fault, just take responsibility and you correct that before the Lord. If you're not a Christian, would you become one tonight? Would you come believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Would you repent of your sins, acknowledge your faith, and be buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of sins? Or maybe there's an erring child of God who needs to make correction. If you're subject in any way, would you come all together? We stand while we sing.